Morning, Nick. We all ready for mash?
All greased and ready.
Good. My name is James Clark. I'm the head brewer here at Hook Norton and the 5th generation of the founder to be involved with the brewing. The brewery is built on a tower principle where we use gravity as much as possible in the production of the beer. All of the water comes from our own wells and we're still using a steam engine to provide all of our motive power. The brewing day begins at 6 AM when we mash in. That is, we mix the crushed malt with hot water, again drawn from our own wells, heated up, in the mash tun. That has the effect of reactivating the enzymes present, and the starch that's present in the grain is converted into maltose, and that's our main fermentable extract. We're now in the malting room and going to take a look at one of our main raw materials, malting barley. This is made from a variety of barley called Maris Otter, and that's how it's delivered to the brewery in these sacks and looking like the sample in my hand. Before we can actually use it for making the beer, we need to crush these grains, pass them through the mill so that we can mix them with the hot water later on in the process. And here's a sample that's been crushed. We like to try and crush each and every grain because if we don't there'll be no extract, but we need to be careful not to crush them too finely, and in particular you can see the husks, that's the outer part of the grains, are still intact, and that's how we like to leave them because they actually help with the filtering in the mash tun later in the process.
My name is David Clark and I'm Managing Director of this company, and together with my son James we run the brewery. I've been here since 1960 brewing, and I've seen a lot of changes in that time. But this particular job I'm doing now is called setting the taps, and this hasn't changed for 100 years. Basically what I'm doing is running the wort, which is a sweet liquid I'm drawing off from the mash tun. The mash has been sitting in there for 2 hours, behaving itself, and quietly conversion has been taking place of the starches in the malt into the sweet liquid, which I call wort, and which is now being run off into the copper to be boiled with the hops. Setting taps is a fairly crucial process. One doesn't want the mash to go down too quickly, so we start the taps off fairly slowly, and they'll gradually be increased over a period of about 2 hours, which is the time it takes to get all the extract out of the mash tun. In my nearly 40 years of brewing with this company, I've seen a lot of changes in the pattern of trade. In the early 60s, we were brewing nearly all mild, and that has changed over the last 40 years. Now we're brewing the predominant beer is bitter. And with our bitter, we won the cask-conditioned World Championship in 1998, which was certainly the pinnacle of my career here. What I'm doing at the moment is starting the sparge. This sprays hot liquor on top of the mash, washes all the extract, all the goodness out of the mash, through the 4 taps below into the copper. We have to balance the speed of the sparge up with the speed of the taps so that the mash just gently drops down until we've got all the goodness out of it.
The 25 horsepower steam engine, which was installed on the 18th of October 1899, still drives everything from water pumps on the ground floor right up to the grist mill on the 4th floor. The drive is transmitted through a series of belts, shafts and open gears. Once the copper's full, we add the hops. We're using 3 varieties of English aroma hops, namely Fuggles, Goldings and Challengers, grown in Hereford and Worcester and Kent. These are added to the copper, and we then boil up the wort with the hops for 1 hour and 20 minutes. Boiling has a number of effects. It breaks down the enzymes so they can't cause any further action later on. It extracts the bitterness and aroma from the hops, and it also sterilises the wort. Hops are used in beer to give both bitterness and aroma. These are some Goldings hops. We're actually using the female flower of the hop plant, which we can see there. After they've been harvested, they're dried and then compressed into tight sacks. And if we actually give these a rub, and there's a lovely citrusy aroma. Empty casks are returned to the brewery where they're washed and steamed, ready for refilling. Nowadays, nearly all of the casks are either of aluminium or stainless steel construction, with wooden ones reserved for just one particular pub. After boiling for an hour and 20 minutes, we run the copper into the hop back, and basically this does exactly what it says, in that it keeps the hops back and allows us to pump the wort up to the cooler. The hop back's a large open vessel with what we call a false floor as well as a solid floor. The false floor has a number of slots in it, and this keeps the hops back but allows the wort to pass through. The wort is then pumped back up to the top of the brewery, ready for gravity to play its part once again. There are two coolers involved in the process. The first is a large open vessel, only a few inches deep, and the second one is a more modern Paraflow heat exchanger. The wort needs to be cooled from a little under boiling point to a temperature of around 62 degrees Fahrenheit, at which we pass it into the fermenting vessel, ready for the process of fermentation. As the wort runs into the fermenting vessel, it is aerated and the yeast is then added and mixed in. The yeast converts sugars present into alcohol and is also responsible for flavour development. This process needs careful control, particularly of temperature. As well as operating a modern fleet of vehicles of 5 lorries and 2 vans, we also still run 2 Shire horses. I think some 12 or 14 years ago we got 2 Shire horses back. I'm using them for local deliveries and shows and the occasional wedding and such like. The horses you see on show are the same 2 horses that Monday to Friday are busy delivering beer. So the beer is collected in the fermenting vessel at around 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Then a small amount of sterilised and cooled boiled liquor is added to bring the gravity, this is the amount of sugar present, to the right level for customs and excise purposes. But just before we fill the casks, we add a handful of best quality hops to each one. These are Goldings hops of best quality, and this helps to give a little bit more aroma in the glass when the beer is actually dispensed. The brewery owns 38 pubs, and they in themselves are very much focal points for their communities. The brewery is likewise having strong links with local organisations. There are many family members working here, my father, my mother, and indeed many other families, and many people have worked here for a long number of years. The brewery is involved with sponsoring the local football club and the band, also a number of part-time firemen work at the brewery. We try and integrate village life very much with what happens at the brewery. Water, or liquor as brewers refer to it, is pumped from wells beneath the brewery into storage tanks at the very top of the building. Over the course of a year, we produce 7 different beers, of which 95% is cask conditioned. The remaining 5% is bottled beer, which is actually brewed on site and then sent away in tanker to other bottlers. It's also interesting to note that the brewing process is very environmentally friendly. All of the grains which are surplus to requirements after mashing are sent off as cattle feed, and something like the equivalent of 7% of British milk is from cows fed on brewers' grains. This is also where any surplus yeast goes mixed with the spent grains, an essential source of the B vitamins. As much as possible, water's reused in the brewery, and in fact this brewery has one of the best records in terms of amounts of water used per amount of beer produced. Around the fourth day we'll find most of the fermentation is complete, and the yeast which is still on top of the beer can actually be recovered and reused in subsequent brews. This is a process called skimming. All of the fermenting vessels have what we call a parachute in them, basically a funnel with a pipe on the bottom that passes through the bottom of the vessel. We lower this to just above the beer line and allow the yeast to pass through and collect it in containers on the floor below. This yeast is then held under refrigeration until it needs to be reused. Meanwhile, about 24 hours after skimming, we cool down to a temperature of about 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The beer is then run from the fermenting vessel into racking vessels on the floor below. This beer is then run into casks, and these casks are rolled into the cellar, where loads are assimilated, ready for distribution. Also in the cellar we add finings. These are isinglass finings and they have the effect of clarifying the beer. However, the process isn't finished here. It's still down to the person who's going to dispense the beer to nurture it and look after it so we produce the perfect pint. We've talked about fermentation, which is what is actually primary fermentation. That is the fermentation that occurs in the brewery. However, we get a degree of secondary fermentation or conditioning, which occurs in the cask. And this is where some of the yeast that's still present in the beer acts on the remaining sugars. And this also helps to produce more carbon dioxide, which then gives the beer condition or sparkle, as well as using the hops that we've added in the dry hopping process to give a slightly more pronounced hop aroma. Since I joined the company in 1991, we've expanded our range of beers to include 12 Days and Haymaker. In 1996 we resurrected Double Stout, which hadn't been brewed for 79 years. And the latest beer was Generation, which was first brewed in 1997 to celebrate the birth of the 6th generation, my son George. The business was founded in 1849 by my great-great-grandfather, a man called John Harris. He was a farmer and a maltster, that is, he was growing barley and malting it to supply to other local breweries, so it was probably natural that he would try brewing himself. The malting process requires large volumes of water, or as brewers call it, liquor, and he found this was of particularly good quality for brewing, so started doing some himself. This would have been on a very small, almost a farmhouse type scale. In 1865, with the malting business expanding, he expanded the malt house by adding another wing and a kiln. In 1872, with brewing taking on more and more prominence, he built a small 3-storey brewery, parts of which still remain. There are a number of reasons for the beer trade locally starting to expand. Obviously a lot of people were employed in agriculture in those times, and soon after the Banbury to Cheltenham Railway passed through Hook Norton, and it took some 400 men 4 years to dig the Hook Norton stretch. Also, one of the reasons for the railway actually coming to the village was extensive ironstone workings. John Harris's son, another John Harris, and his son-in-law, Alban Clark, joined the business, and they set about expansion plans. And so it was in 1894 new stables were built, followed by new offices and cellars in 1896. So in 1900 the building was completed and the name of the firm was changed to the Hook Norton Brewery Company Limited. However, having built the new building and expanded the business, there are a number of issues that affected beer trade. A Licensing Act in 1909 severely restricted the sale of beer and followed shortly afterwards by the First World War. It was actually during the First World War that Alban Clark, son-in-law of the founder, was killed in a cycling accident. He was a very keen fisherman and was on his way to a local spot when he fell off his bicycle and never recovered from his injuries. Bill Clark, that is my grandfather, actually joined the business at a very difficult time. There was the Depression of the 1930s, then followed by the Second World War with all the problems that brought, including government restrictions on material usage and strengths of beer. In 1960, David Clark, that's Bill's son and my father, joined the company. Again, this was not an easy time. The big brewers were experimenting with keg beer, and this started to largely take over from cask ale, being so much easier to handle in the pub. However, in the early 1970s, real ale had something of a revival, helped greatly by the emergence of CAMRA, the campaign for real ale. And since then, cask ale has increased in popularity. It's always been said from a family point of view that it would be my choice whether or not I enter the business. However, there's inevitably pressure from outside with questions like, when will you start at the brewery, not are you going to start at the brewery? Well, I must say the choice was mine. I think I'm very fortunate and lucky to be able to have that as an option. There's certainly changes being made, but I'd like to think all the changes we make are evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Just taking parts of the process that perhaps need improving. I think we must be very conscious to remember that we can live with the past, but we mustn't live in it. We live in a very dynamic world, and despite being a very long established traditional company, we still need to keep abreast of things. There we are, mate.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Jane.
This is last week's generation. Everything all right?
I think that was absolutely perfect. That's really brilliant
Nice and clear.
on that.
Load of conditioning.
Lovely hop on that. Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, that's beautiful. That really is. You quite nearly get addicted to this place, couldn't you? With a beer like that.
150 years of brewing it. Let's hope we can carry on brewing it for another 150 years.
Mm.
Yes, yeah.